How do you build trust when no one tells you the truth anymore? How do you listen when all you want to do is to solve problems? How do you lead without faking it, especially when your company has outgrown your old playbook? If you're wrestling with growth ceilings, team challenges, or your own leadership blind spots, then this episode is going to hit home. My guest is Rachel Burr, executive coach, people expert who's worked with leaders across industries. And we translate her hard-earned insights into the real-world chaos of job sites and office challenges and everything that you're focused on as the leader of your business. So let's dive right in. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Rachel, welcome to Construction Genius.
Thank you, Eric.
Happy to have you on the show. In commercial construction, we've got hard deadlines, tight margins, crews that don't really respond well to fluff. And given that, what's one leadership behavior that you've seen that can unlock performance in any industry? And how might a construction company owner adapt that on a job site or in the office?
I love that question. And I have to admit, I'm not really good with fluff either. I'm more of a direct and supportive kind of a person, which is one reason I love construction. I love manufacturing, very direct. Fundamentally, I think, and maybe one of the most underappreciated leadership skills, qualities is listening. That when we really listen to understand, as Franklin Covey would have said, that's when we start to really be able to have perspective, be able to see outside our own view. And this happens in tech companies too. But when you think about the difference between maybe a leader who's in the office versus in the field, but even leaders that are in the field, there can be such a big chasm, even just geographically, depending on where the office is located, that being able to bridge that, to be able to be with people, ask them questions and really listen, especially because one of the challenges leaders face as they work their way up the ladder, they don't realize it a lot of times, but people start to censor themselves. They start to not tell them what they think because they're worried about repercussions. They're worried about delivering bad news. And one of the biggest challenges for leaders, especially if they came up in an organization, is they still see themselves as one of the folks on the ground, front line, all of that. And they don't realize that other people don't see themselves the same way.
Let's explore that a little bit. I have some strategies I use when I'm listening. One of the things I do is I ball up the toes on my foot, on my right foot, just to try and bring myself into the present. When you say listen to understand, many times when we're talking, when we're involved in a conversation, there's emotions involved. And sometimes those emotions can overtake a conversation. What advice do you have for a leader to help them detach emotionally while still staying engaged in the conversation?
I would say almost always there are emotions involved. It just depends on the types of emotions and the intensity of them. We like to think we're very logical. Most of the time, we're actually making emotional decisions and then justifying them with logic. I think, first of all, recognizing when we get triggered, when that emotion starts to flow. People talk about the amygdala hijack, that part of our brain that basically floods with emotion. And historically, that had a really good place to get us to move, fight, flight, all of that. But our world today is far more complex. And so that same impetus to react can actually be very detrimental. To your point, getting in your physical space, something as simple as, first of all, just breathe. And I know we think, oh, how overly simplistic, but let's remember that our brains work on oxygen. And it actually gives us pause because we have to take advantage of the space between our reaction and our response. We may not get to choose the reaction of the emotions bubbling up, but we get to choose the response, even if it sometimes doesn't feel like we get to do. We get to do that. So I think to your point, staying physical, recognizing when you are getting agitated, take a breath and ask a question. Sometimes it may even just take you time to get grounded and pull kind of off of that reaction. But listen to the actual words, because sometimes what happens is we start to get stuck in our head and we start to think about, well, how am I going to respond? How am I going to refute that? How am I going to bring something else out? And when you hear yourself do that, and this is practice, start to step back and really focus on the words that they're using. And you know what? Initially, you may not hear the first few words they say because you're trying to manage your emotions. When we talk about emotional intelligence, self-management is one of the hardest things to do. I think it is for me. So I think, to your point, staying as present as possible, whatever works for you. To your point, curling your toes, being aware that you're being triggered, and focusing as much as possible on the conversation, all good places to start.
I think that a lot of people buy into that idea of taking a breath, but one of the things that hinders us in doing that is that when we actually take a breath, the other person sees that. And in a face-to-face conversation, sometimes we think that we're displaying a weakness by taking a breath, or we're even communicating in some way our irritation with the other person. So how should I be conscious about that, or self-conscious, or should I just not worry about it and realize that breath does enable me to create the space between stimulus and response?
Ooh, I like that, stimulus and response. I would say we always need to be aware of how other people are perceiving our behavior. People like to say, well, this is just who I am. Well, great. If you want to be able to communicate and you want to be effective, you might want to understand how the other person is perceiving you. So I absolutely think you're right. I think sometimes when our body language communicates so much more, a lot of times, than our words, our tone, our facial expressions, all of it, there's a couple of things. One, there's how we take a breath. There's the the sigh that sounds really irritated, or I'm not sure what the vulnerability breath maybe it sounds more like kind of a thing, or pulling it in. I think practicing just like kind of nose breathe, first of all, and managing that breath, because especially when we are in fight or flight, and if this is an emotionally charged situation and your person standing opposite you they are more likely to interpret every little thing they can as threat. Now, part of it is also, it's not just the breath. It's not like that's the end of the conversation. So being prepared to take that breath, engage in the behavior that will help manage through that emotion, even if that maybe you're not going to do all of these things perfectly. That's just not going to happen. So start there. And communication is an interaction. So watch what happens as a response. Where is it maybe you need to adjust or clarify? A lot of times the questions we ask, again, going back to body language, tone, etc., humans have a tendency to jump in with a why question. Easy to put us on the defensive, kind of asks for a yes or no. Start asking, how or what, and listen. So yeah, the breath you may or may not get that to the point where people don't react to it. You can't always control. Well, you can't control how other people react. But remember, it's a conversation. That's one piece of it. Work on it, and remember that even if you don't do it very well, great. Then keep going in the conversation. It's more than that one breath.
Yeah, that's true, right? Because even if they see the breath, it's almost better for them to see the breath than to hear ill-considered words, which you can then not take back, and you have to start up. I'd rather apologize for a breath than for words that I can't take back.
Agreed.
One thing we deal with in construction is ambiguity, design changes, labor shortages, delays, all these kinds of things. In your work, what helps leaders stay effective when they're forced to make decisions with incomplete or shifting information?
I think, first of all, shifting information, shifting context, more and more that's ubiquitous. It's fast. We have to basically pivot. People love the word pivot. I think actually maybe chaos is more the standard, and we actually get to only stay stable for a little while. A lot of what happens is before any change has to occur. What is the context you're setting for your folks? How do they know why are we doing this? So that they can see the big picture. Too often people put folks in this narrow path, kind of the way, you think about an assembly line, especially the way assembly lines used to be. You had your station, you did that one thing. So if something broke down, you didn't know how to pivot. You didn't know how to shift because you only knew this one thing. If your folks understand the context, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. This is where we're going to. And then when something shifts, they already have context. Doesn't mean that the communication doesn't happen. It needs to. But with that context, they have a better understanding of how those shifts are occurring. The other piece, again, in advance of what these changes have to be, how are you building trust? So how are you building trust and collaboration up front? Because when all of a sudden something happens, you may have to take a very directive kind of approach. We're going to do this because you don't have time to explain. But if you've established that relationship and understanding before that happens, you'll be far more successful.
What do you mean by trust?
Excellent question. There's different kinds of trust. Patrick Lencioni, big leadership guy, talks about there is predictive trust and there's vulnerability-based trust. And both are necessary, by the way. Predictive trust is if I tell you I'll have something by Friday, I'll have it to you by Friday. You trust me to deliver it by Friday. Predictive trust. Vulnerability-based trust is I trust that I can tell you something in a way that you're not going to just attack. You're not going to completely disparage. You're not going to just push it aside. I can trust you to be truthful. And because a lot of times vulnerability gets thrown around in a lot of different ways, but being able to be open and honest and creating that trust in the environment, you are far more likely to be successful, because what we said earlier is people start to edit themselves, not even when you just climb a ladder, but when you demonstrate that you don't handle feedback well. You don't handle information that you don't want to hear well. So you know what? You're not going to get that information anymore. And if you don't have the information, you're operating with an incomplete understanding, you are far more likely to say, go off a cliff, than if you understand where you are and what's really going on.
So then in a new leadership role, and I am functioning with incomplete information, but I still have to make a call. I still have to make a decision. What is the most effective way to go about that? Or rather, how should I be managing my internal game so that I can still lead without sort of getting into the realm of where there's no decision being made at all?
Oh, yeah. And let's be clear. When you don't make a decision, air quotes, that is still a decision. Let's not fool ourselves into thinking because we're not taking action. I think first of all, okay, what information do I have? Who has that information? Because it's not always going to be us. And that is one of the biggest challenges I think leaders have, especially when they're new leaders. They have gone from being that individual contributor to now having to rely on their team, having to build their team and bring it in. What's the information I need, and as quickly as I can? And then at some point, what's enough information to take a decision, to make a decision? Also recognizing that you are not always going to make a perfect decision. A lot of times there is risk in any decision, but there is also risk in not taking it. And then afterwards, how do you do that after action review? Like they talk about, like, what did you learn? Because then you're continuing to grow and you're going to loop, and it's going to help you make better decisions along the way. And I think this is one of the biggest challenges for new leaders, is that they think they have to know all the answers. They think they have to know the decisions, and they can't let anybody know that maybe they don't.
Right.
And the best leaders are open to understanding what other people have to tell them.
It's interesting. In construction, we're all familiar with how emotional construction gets, but emotional intelligence isn't necessarily something that most people associate with construction leadership. And also, for many people in construction, that phrase emotional intelligence is kind of cringy. However, there is some insight in that phrase and what's behind it. So how do you coach leaders to use emotional intelligence in a way that drives accountability and results, and not just some sort of feel-good empathy?
No kumbaya. Is that what we're talking about?
Kind of, yeah. No, we need to get stuff done.
Yeah, we do need to get stuff done. And again, I am not a fluffy person. Anybody who knows me will not tell you I'm fluffy. However, I am really good at understanding people's emotions or listening to it. One of the things folks have to know is this whole idea of, well, you just leave your emotional self at the door or in your truck before you walk on site. It's like, that's just crap. That's not going to happen. And it's like thinking it is, again, you are shutting yourself off. and pretending information's not there. Emotions are data. And it doesn't mean that you make decisions out of emotion, reactively, in anger, in stress, any of that. But understanding it is critical because it's telling you something. It's telling you something about yourself. It's telling you what other people are experiencing. So for example, if I feel all of a sudden something bubbles up and I feel triggered, angry, whatever, it doesn't mean I react out of that. It's more like, okay, what is going on? My body is telling me something. My gut is telling me something. And it's marrying that logical kind of part of our brain to that emotional and being able to say, okay, what is that data? What is it telling me? And how does that match up with what it is I'm trying to do? Neither one is necessarily 100% right. They have to listen to each other. And in order to be able to take in all that information, you have to be able to appreciate your emotions, other people's emotions. Otherwise, you are leaving data on the table.
When is it that my emotions lead me astray?
Let's see. I think that's hard to know because it depends on the situation. It depends on the person. It depends on your experience with interpreting your own emotions. I do think we're predisposed to see things as a threat. And if we're in an environment where that's very likely, you always go back to the whole tiger jumps out of a bush, you run, fight, flight, whatever. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's be clear. If you're walking down a very unfamiliar street in a dangerous area at night, you might want to listen to whatever that is more specifically. If you're in a complex situation at work or in a discussion with a person, those immediate reactions that want to push you to react, that's where you're going to have a problem. Yeah, sometimes might it be the right response? Sure. But as a leader, it is far more important to understand the situation and respond rather than react, because that is too often you're going to come up with the wrong response. Emotion's going to lead you down a direction that feels good in the moment, like it feels like it's the right thing. And then you back off, and the next day or even 15 minutes later, you're like, crap, what did I just do? And back to your point about words you can't take back. That's a good time for those to happen.
Okay. So what about if you're in a situation where you've said the right thing, but you've said it in the wrong way? And you need, on the one hand, to rectify the wrong way you've said it, but the point still remains. And so it's almost as if when I go to someone and say, hey, listen, I shouldn't have said it that way, but they then think, yeah, everything that you said about what you said wrong doesn't really count. You still are trying to nail me. But so help me here. How do we deal with that when I'm at the core, I'm correct, but around the delivery of it, I'm incorrect?
Yeah, people like to think that it doesn't matter. I said the right thing. I used the right words. I worked with a guy I really like working on a manufacturing floor. And first of all, he was an expert. He knew exactly what to do. He knew when things were right, when things were wrong, and he could diagnose a problem like that. The problem is when he went to talk to people about it, the way he said things made it sound like, are you stupid? And he would argue with me, but I didn't say that. It's like, you did. It doesn't matter. You said it because that was the tone of voice you used. That was all these other behavior pieces. Like you said, yes, what he said was right, but he said it in the wrong way. Now, some people can do this next part. Some people can learn it. Some people, I don't know. I think they're always going to struggle. Not so sure they can do it. But sometimes, and again, you said, well, I didn't say it right, but never say it with a but, because basically when I say all this good stuff and then but, you've just discounted everything I said. So
right.
you just said, don't do that. Instead, and again, it's a little vulnerability here, but it's about stepping into that didn't come across correctly. Here was my intent. Because a lot of times the problem is that we judge ourselves based on our intent. Other people judge us based on their experience of us.
There you go.
So being able to put the intent out in the space where you can both see it, hear it, dig in, doesn't mean the other person's still going to feel good about what you did. But going under the intent can then help the two of you come up with a different way of handling it, or a different understanding in the moment and a different way of handling it going forward.
Think about the last time you promoted someone into a leadership role and it failed. Why did it fail? I can tell you one reason. People know how to build projects, but they don't know how to build and lead teams of people. Construction comes with its challenges that only insiders truly understand. Generic leadership training doesn't cut it. You need a program to train your leaders built specifically for construction professionals led by an industry expert. And my online course, The Shift, is exactly that course. It has 5 modules. It'll teach your people how to control their calendars and reduce stress and embrace chaos and accomplish their critical tasks. It will teach them the 3 essential messages they have to communicate every day in order to motivate and lead their team effectively. It'll show them how to build and lead a high-performing team, give them a framework for running effective meetings so they'll be able to solve problems in less than an hour, and also give them a higher perspective on their leadership that will enable them to work on the business and on their teams and not get stuck in the weeds micromanaging. So go out to my website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, read all about the course, and then enroll yourself and your leaders in the course, and I guarantee that it will transform your leadership. If it does not, you take the whole course and you didn't get benefit from it, you just send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, and I will cheerfully refund you 100% of your money. I'm really confident this course will transform your leadership. So again, go out to the website, theshift.constructiongenius.com, learn more about the course, and start taking it today. So that assumes that the trust that you talked about earlier has been established, the relational trust specifically. But that's a good framework there to think about the intent versus the experience and to understand that those two things don't always match up. So let me ask you this then. A lot of people, they start their construction business and it grows rapidly. They're running, they're gunning, they're bringing guys on to build projects, they're making money, they're doing well. But then at a certain point, the company hits a ceiling. The growth slows down. Maybe the profit gets eroded. They get stuck with cultural issues. When a leader feels that stuckness, where should they start to break that inertia?
It kind of depends on where the stuckness is. One of the things that shows up for me when you say it that way, especially whether it's a founder driving a company, in my experience, this is true of whether it's construction or tech or anything. This was somebody's baby. This is something that this is their heart and soul in this company. That is very hard. And again, I don't like to parentify all of this stuff, but it's an analogy we all know, right?
Of course.
You do have to be prepared. You have to prepare the company to let your baby grow up. Yeah. The challenges for a leader, and maybe for parents too, you have to be able to recognize when it's time to bring someone else in that can do what you can't do. So for a founder, especially, when do you recognize that you're going to need, say, a professional CEO or a professional COO or somebody that has those capabilities, that has had that at a level that you haven't? You know the industry, you know your work, but you may not know how to structure the business or how to lead teams in certain ways beyond the smaller teams that you have. As a leader, first and foremost, especially as a founder, how do you start to recognize that this stuckness isn't temporary? Yeah. This is something that's it has to be a fundamental shift. And I have seen so many founders really struggle with that. And the problem becomes, or the opportunity becomes, how do they recognize at what point that them not opening up, them not shifting is actually damaging their business, damaging their baby?
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking with a CEO some time ago, and he was reflecting on the fact that he was tremendously brilliant at business development and even solving specific project problems. But in terms of building a scalable, sustainable business, that just wasn't his strong suit. And he really had to wrestle through that because, like you said, I built that. I built this thing. And it takes a tremendous amount of self-awareness and probably some help from someone outside yourself, whether it's internal in your company or external, to work through that process.
Yeah. And the other thing, when you talk about that leader, I think one of the things they don't see, especially you may have somebody that came in, they are a great builder, not even just like the construction industry, but they build things, they create things. That is what they love to do. And when they realize, back to your point, if they can bring someone else in that can help scale the business, because all of a sudden that's structure and that's a lot of this other stuff that's not about the creative part at all, that if you bring someone else to help do that, you actually get to go back to play in the space where you really love and thrive and where you bring real value. You can spend more time doing X and Y in the company because you've got somebody else to do all the stuff you really don't want to do.
It's funny, but sometimes people feel guilty about that, right? I mean, they feel guilty about admitting, I don't do this well, or they feel guilty about not doing the things that they think that someone in their position should do, instead of saying, hold on a second, this is my area of genius. This is what I need to focus on. And now I need to either train people up or hire people in order to take care of the rest.
Yeah. They feel guilty or they feel embarrassed a lot of times. Guilty because maybe they're letting down their teams if they're a person who's very focused on that. We talk about imposter syndrome all the time, and people think a lot of times imposter syndrome only happens at maybe mid-level, entry-level range. I work with CEOs, executives that they'll tell me almost like it's a secret that they feel like an imposter. And
Yes.
I'm like, welcome to being human.
Yeah.
And I was reading a book and I thought this was an interesting take that the only people who at some point don't feel like an imposter are imposters. And I think also, let's give ourselves some credit. If we get to the point where we feel like we're an imposter, that means we're pushing outside our comfort zone. We're
Right.
not playing small.
Right.
And at some point, the imposter syndrome, if we allow it to kind of those gremlins in our head that tell us, oh, you don't know how to do this, you can't let anybody know, we keep it to ourselves because there's a shame involved to it. And so we don't want to let it into the light, but that's where it festers when we do that. And when we give into imposter syndrome, that's when we start to play small. We start to try to pull back into a comfort zone. And first and foremost, just even recognizing that in ourselves is hard. And second, being able to step out with people we trust. Trust is coming up a lot here.
Yep.
Being able to talk it through, it can be scary and it can be so empowering when you recognize, you know what, you're not alone in this. You are not the only one that feels this way. And that is a key part of the journey of being a founder. If your company, if you're fortunate, you're brilliant enough to get to the point where your company can scale, awesome. And be prepared that this is a normal part of your journey and know that you are not alone.
So how do I balance that sense of overcoming the imposter syndrome with the desire to not be faking it till I'm making it, so to speak?
Yeah, it's funny. I hate that term because I agree with you. I can feel it too. And I'm never sure exactly where I found this quote. I think it's in the book, Turn the Ship Around. Great book, by the way. And actually the sequel is called Leadership is Language. And it's by this former submarine captain. Yeah. And he instead said, behave until you believe, which is a much more authentic piece. And I will talk to clients about, we have inside us a confident, grounded self. There are places where we feel confident. It may be in our previous role. It may be with our family. It may be ordering coffee at Starbucks.
Yeah.
Because, some of the lists at Starbucks can be quite intimidating. So think about, embody that. When you feel confident, what does that feel like? How do you invite that confident person to what you're doing? Part of confidence is being able to say, I don't know, and owning that. Not I don't know sheepishly, but I don't know. So being able to step into that confident self and then being able to ask for input, even if you don't at first want to call it help, it is help. But opening up to that is really important, because that fake it till you make it, like that, the smarmy over the top, you know what that is? That's just a freshly painted like imposter syndrome. It's not real. And you're going to play smaller because you're worried that shell is going to crack.
Yeah. That's interesting. You've worked with a lot of leaders across a variety of industries. What are one or two leadership mistakes you see smart people make over and over again?
Going back to the one thing I will say about listening, I think that that's critical. Thinking that they either do know it all or they should know it all. That is foundationally a key issue that leaders come up with. And knowing, back to your point also, of how to communicate, I think is critical.
Can I ask you a question again about listening? Why is listening so painful?
When you say painful, what do you mean?
There's a deep resistance that many people have to listening. I think it has something to do with, number one, maybe being afraid of what others are going to say, or maybe it's a lack of care for other people, or it could be just a general impatience. Why that creates pain or psychic stress or something like that? Why is that, do you think?
I think it's one of those examples where the same behavior on the surface can be driven by different underlying kind of under drivers or sources. You can have people that are just impatient, that they don't have time. The world's moving fast. Keep going. I don't have time to listen. The problem is when we don't take time to listen up front, usually what happens is it takes far more time to work through all the problems and challenges that actually just caused. So the idea of time up front versus longer time, that's not actually a good solution. You do have people who they just think they know it all. They don't think anybody else has input, and they're really entrenched in that hierarchy, is that you're down there, you do what I say, no questions asked, just do it. They don't think they need to listen. Going back to the whole, if you don't know the water you're swimming in, you don't know when there's going to be a shark. So you are specifically eliminating information and data that you need because you already think you know it all. Some listening is honestly, people just don't know how. It is a skill. And people think active listening means that you're staying quiet. Well, yeah, you do need to actually stop talking. You know, the old phrase, we have two ears and one mouth should be proportional. But they don't know how to listen. They are listening thinking they need to respond. They are listening. So there should be another word other than listen for what that is. They don't know how to ask good questions. A couple of times I'll hear people say, yes, no questions, first of all. Now, sometimes those are appropriate. Like, is the house on fire? Yes or no?
Right.
Seems like but otherwise you're giving people only a very narrow range. A lot of times the response is somewhere on a continuum and you need that information. The other time, one of my favorites, people they make a statement or they ask a question, but it's really a statement.
Yeah.
Usually started with, don't you think?
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not a question. That's you pushing your assumption on somebody else. And so sometimes not only do people not know how to ask good questions, but they don't realize that by the questions they're asking, they're not even getting good information. And so they're reinforced a lot of times for saying, well, see, I don't need to listen. They don't know anything anyway. It's like you are your own biggest challenge.
Right.
So that's what I would say. I think it's a skill. There's different underlying reasons. And as leaders, we are different at our core. So we have to figure out what's going on with me. And I guess hopefully you'll have people around you that'll tell you.
Yeah, that's interesting, right? I think one of the problems that leaders have is that every leader says that they want their people to give them feedback. Right? Because that's what we're supposed to say. But then how do you ensure that you actually get real feedback from people? How can people say to you, hey, listen, dude, you actually don't have any clothes on, instead of saying, dude, that uniform is awesome. You look great.
Yeah. The emperor's new clothes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and first, let's just be real. The idea of wanting to be open to feedback and the reality of when it hits, when people really give you feedback, those are very different. And you have to be prepared. And again, you may not handle it really well the first time. Couple of things. One, try to get your information from different sources. So do you have people around you that you really trust that you know will tell you the hard truth because they've told you in the past? They've told you, I was going to swear, I'm not sure how you feel about that on your show.
No, you're fine. It's a construction podcast. Go ahead.
There you go. They'll tell you if your shit stinks. And it's like, it's important to have those people because too often, they talk about having yes men and people that always agree with you. And that is such it's a much more pleasant place to be as a leader. One of the best, when I was working for a home builder, one of the best pieces of advice a leader ever gave me is, first of all, if you're always agreeing with me, what am I paying you for?
Right.
And second, hire people who intimidate you, not physically, obviously, but,
sure.
But hire people who have good opinions, who you think can take your job and who will tell you. Now, there are also things like take away the fear factor. So a lot of times you have hotlines, for example, with construction manufacturing. Maybe you have surveys that are anonymous. Right. And assuming people believe it's anonymous, which is really important, you can get information that way. You can get information through skip level meetings. So you're going to the folks below the people who report to you. Now, one of the things that's really important is even if you get honest feedback in and you do nothing with it, it's better never to have asked at all. Because they actually went on a limb. They gave you their feedback. They provided their thoughts and you do nothing with it. Chances are they're not going to do it again. Why would they?
Sure.
You're not going to do anything with it anyway.
It's interesting. I think we have to be, as leaders, willing to tolerate the crusty folks, so to speak, who do tell us the truth. And we have to demonstrate that too, because there may be 1 out of 10 people who are actually willing to tell you the truth, but the other 9 are looking at that one person and they're seeing what the result is. And if they have the room, if you give them the room to tell you the truth, you then give permission to the other group of people to at least begin to tell you the truth.
Yep.
But if you're always striking down the person who's telling you the truth or ignoring them, then you're really hindering what everyone else is going to tell you as well.
It's that whole, they may listen to you, what you say, they will always listen to what you do.
Yeah, it's interesting.
All right, quick break to talk about my book, Construction Genius. This is what I want you to do. Go to Amazon, search for the book, read all of the 5-star reviews, because there's a ton of them. Over 50 to be precise. And the reason I want you to read them is because real people wrote those reviews who've actually read the book. And it'll give you an idea of why you should go and buy a copy right now on Amazon. And here's the deal. If you purchase 10 or more copies for your company, and then send me an email, eric@constructiongenius.com, I'll come in via Zoom and do a 1-hour Q&A and a bonus training session with your team at no charge. I normally charge $4,500 for an hour of my time. And again, for you, I'll do it at no charge if you buy 10 or more copies of my book. And the reason you should buy it is all in the title. It's effective, hands-on, practical, simple, no BS, leadership, strategy, sales, and marketing advice for construction companies. So if you're in the construction industry, this book is for you. So you can get it on Amazon. You can also get it on Audible in the audio version as well, narrated by yours truly. And I know you'll really enjoy it. So go out and get the book. And now back to the interview.
So you've been around a lot of great leaders. What's one belief or mindset they all seem to share that helps them to sustain long-term growth?
That they don't know it all, especially to your point, as the company grows, even if maybe they know the business inside and out at one level, if they want to grow, they personally are not scalable. And they have to be able to let go and delegate. And oh, by the way, not just delegate where we throw something over the wall, because when that happens, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The person doesn't understand, they didn't have context, all of this, and they don't do the right thing or they make a mistake. And then you pull it back and say, well, see, I told you, it's just easier to do it myself.
Yeah.
It's always easier to do it yourself when you are the expert. The problem is, again, you are not scalable. So being able to develop the people around you will take more time. It is not that immediate gratification, that non immediate hit on your ROI. It's not. And being able to recognize that you personally cannot do it all. If you don't want your company to grow, in fact, if you want to be a one-person shop, then you know what? You don't have to do any of that.
Absolutely.
But if you can really accept the fact that you can't do it all and you need help, you need other people to work with you, that opens up leaders and companies to great things.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that. So tell us a little bit more, Rachel, about the work that you do and how people can get in touch with you. What else you're working on at the moment?
I am an executive coach, people expert, as I like to say. I also work with the executives. I work with their teams. I do one-on-one coaching to really help leaders step into the best of who they can be, understanding who they are at their core, because a lot of times leadership looks like a cookie cutter. We think, okay, these are the examples I've had of leadership. This is what I have to be. I push myself into this mold. And you leave so much of who you are on the table and it impedes you. So being able to step back and help leaders understand, who are you at your core? Strengths, weaknesses, let's be honest, talents, passions, all of those things. And then being able to bring that to your role, because different roles will require different things, but you still need to be able to bring yourself to it.
Let me just ask you this real quick. As an executive coach, you spend a lot of time asking people questions, and most of the people listening to this show are themselves coaches of the people in their organization. Can you give us 2 or 3 of the most powerful questions that you ask in a coaching session that gets great conversation flowing?
Couple of things. I love that question, by the way. So I'm thinking about one particular client because it helps me focus, which applies very broadly to a lot of leaders. We use words that we assume other people understand, because we think they mean the same thing to us. So someone like what you did earlier about trust. I'll listen. Someone will say something in this very assured way. And I'll say, well, wait, so you said trust. What does that mean to you? And it's very important. It's not just what does that mean, or what it is about what does that mean to you? And then you start to dig in and you start to realize, oh, my perspective, my lens is actually different than that. I made some assumptions. And by the way, we like to say, oh, I don't make assumptions. Oh, that's crap. We do. Everybody does. It's the way our brains work. The best thing we can do is to be able to check in and try to crawl back down our assumptions to the actual information. So asking someone just to clarify what they've said, even if it's a word, do that. One of the other ones is actually a statement. They'll be talking about something and they may stop and I'll say, tell me more, and see where it keeps going. Remember, as a coach, as a mentor, it's not about you. It's about them. It's always about them, that you're there to help them grow. And it may look different in different situations, but it's easy for us to come with, oh, this is my expertise. This is what I know. This is how I want to provide you value. Yeah, you're going to provide value, but step back. And going back to, again, kind of that what, how question, when they tell you something that it's really easy to say why. And it doesn't mean that why is a bad question. It's not. But a lot of times we don't manage the tone of why very well. So me asking you, okay, well, why would you do that? Versus, why would you do that? Same question. Sometimes the what and how questions are easier for us. So it could be something, well, what makes you think that? Or how does that work? Or how does that show up for you? So asking these broad questions that, one, aren't yes or no. They're not why in a way that's going to make us defensive. And they're not statements masquerading as questions. So you're giving people space. You're giving people space to explore and understand, as opposed to us trying to take people down specific roads where they think that they should go based on a few little pieces of information. And then we're like, oh, okay, I know the problem. Assume you don't. Assume you may not even know the problem by the end. I'm not saying you won't, but ask questions in a way that helps you keep digging, helps the other person keep digging into themselves.
That's really great. I appreciate that. So how can people get in touch with you?
Well, I have my coaching website, which is Catamentum, which is Catalyze Momentum, catamentum.com.
Okay.
And I have written a book recently. It's called
cool.
Butterfly Goo. Yeah, Butterfly Goo, the down and dirty truth of transformation, really looking at how we make personal changes. And you can find that on butterflygoobook.net. I'm also on LinkedIn for anybody who wants to find me there. Everybody's a lot of times on LinkedIn. So Those are good ways to get a hold of me.
Awesome. We will have links in the show notes to all of that. And I really, really appreciate you joining us here today, Rachel. Thank you.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate you having me.
Hey, thank you for listening to my interview with Rachel. Check out the links in the show notes to learn more about her, check out her book, and share this interview with other people. Also, last request, give the show a rating and a review wherever you get your podcasts, and I'll catch you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity, and to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.